Greetings, one and all, and welcome to this inaugural edition of Ask Me Anything Melrose. This program is being brought to you by the Melrose Public Schools, the Melrose School Committee, and Melrose Mayor Paul Broder. My name is Ed O'Connell. I am the chair of the Melrose School Committee, and I will be the host of this edition of our program. Our guest today is Melrose Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Julie Kuchenberger. Dr. Kuchenberger has agreed to answer any and all questions related to our schools here in Melrose, generally speaking, and more specifically with regard to the implementation of her return to instruction plan as approved by the Melrose School Committee this past August, all against the backdrop of the current COVID-19 pandemic. Questions have been submitted in advance, some 100 and counting. And questions may also be submitted during the live stream of this program. We'll do our best to get to as many as we can in the time allotted. Furthermore, in the interest of time, we have attempted to consolidate the questions received by topic. And a further programming note, this program is being recorded for future broadcast. We're live streaming today via StreamYard.com, and this program is made possible by the work of our terrific in-house technical expert and Melrose Public Schools staff member, Melanie Acevedo. And Melanie, thank you very much for the work, and with the subject matter support of my school committee colleague, Jennifer McAndrew. Jen, thank you for your work. To begin this today, I'm pleased to welcome Melrose Mayor Paul Broder for an introduction to today's program and the topic at hand. Mr. Mayor, welcome.
Thank you, Chairman O'Connell. And I want to thank everyone for watching tonight and for submitting questions. As you all know, COVID has presented unprecedented challenges for everyone, especially our school district. Parents, teachers, administrators, support staff, and most especially our students. All have questions and concerns about schools in general, remote learning, hybrid models, synchronous versus asynchronous learning, special education, athletics, extracurricular activities, and more. Many of you have raised these concerns through social media, email, or during one-on-one conversations. As you might imagine, it can be quite challenging to respond to each inquiry individually, particularly where so many have similar questions. The purpose of this Ask Me Anything program is to share information broadly and address with candor the questions you have submitted. It is an important opportunity to explain the district's approach to education during COVID and hear feedback from you and promote better communication. I hope this will be the first of an extended series of Ask Me Anything sessions regarding our cities and our schools. Thank you all very much for joining the conversation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Much appreciated. And it is my pleasure, without any further ado, to welcome our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Julie Kuchenberger. Dr. Kuchenberger, welcome. Thank you for being with us. You joined the Melrose Public Schools this past July 1st, and while your tenure to date has been chock full of significant changes to the way we teach and learn here in Melrose, all owing to COVID-19, we realize this may be one of the first times folks are getting to see you and hear from you. Not all folks, but some. And so we thank you for the time. And as the name of our program is Ask Me Anything Melrose, let's get right to those questions. We have a great opener, in fact, which comes to us from Dan DeRico, a parent in the district. After all the thoughtful pre-planning that was done, how do you feel, Superintendent, we are doing thus far in practice, particularly with regard to K and first grades in the hybrid model?
Well, first, Chairman O'Connell, I'll say thank you so much for having me tonight. Good evening, Melrose. It's my honor to be here with you and answer as many questions as I'm able to in the next hour or so. So how are things going so far? I would say amazingly. Our little learners, our preschoolers, our kindergartners, our first graders are doing an outstanding job adjusting to the protocols and to what school needs to look like at this time in order for all of us to mitigate risk and stay in school longer. I've had a chance to visit all of our elementary schools, and our teachers are also doing amazing work. It's pretty remarkable to think how much they have adjusted their practice and adapted to the needs of today's learners in such a short window of time. So from my observations and conversations that I'm having with folks, it is not without challenges, certainly not perfect, but we're off to an amazing start.
Terrific. Thank you for that, Doctor. Let's move to topic one, which today is metrics and models, if you will. We've had a lot of questions about the metrics and phases of reopening. And Scott, a middle school parent, has asked us a series of questions that have been echoed by several others. And if I may, Superintendent, I'll just read them all and ask you to respond to them collectively, if you would. And I'm happy to repeat any of them as needed. First of all, what factors are being considered for reopening? Who makes the final call with regard to reopening? And I assume this is reopening for in-person learning. So who makes the final call? Is it the school committee or is it the superintendent? If we're still in the yellow phase in Melrose, is it a foregone conclusion that remote learning continues? Other parents have likewise asked, when will we be told if there is any change in the next phase of hybrid starting on October 19th? And furthermore, what is the likelihood that grades 2 and above will begin the hybrid program as planned, given that the positive rates of COVID-19 are trending upward?
Okay, so first I'll start by saying we are open. School is in session. The first official day of school was Wednesday, September 16th, and all of our students were engaged in various learning and relationship building activities. Our theme this year really focuses on relationships, routines, and resilience. And so those first few days were used as transitional days. We had, even before the 16th, some activities that started for students, but our highest needs learners, who in terms of our return to instruction plan, we call Group C in Melrose, those students started all in person right on Wednesday, September 16th, and they've been coming every day, all in person every week. Our kindergarten and first grade students started in the hybrid model on the second day of school, which was Thursday, September 17th. We had a practice day for cohort 1, kindergarten and first grade students, and then a practice day for cohort 2, K and 1 students. And then they've started their hybrid rotation on the following Monday. So they're in their third week. This is cohort 1's second full week of instruction. So we're open and things are going great. We are learning a lot about the hybrid model that's going to inform our next phase as we approach October 19th. So we are on track and on pace. At this time, everyone should be planning to be returning to school if your student has chosen the hybrid model on Monday, October 19th. Those students who have chosen the Melrose Distance Learning Academy, they'll stay learning remotely and we'll see no change from what they're experiencing right now. But our hybrid learners in grades 2 through 12 should start thinking about nighttime routines, bedtime routines. One of the things that's going to be different for those students is that we are going to ask them to bring their devices back and forth because we have disseminated most, if not all but most of our Chromebooks that we had in district, and we're awaiting a shipment that's coming in soon, and then we have more coming scheduled for December. But one of the new nighttime routines that I would ask families to think about as we prepare for our next phase of the return to instruction plan is making sure you're charging your device every night. So that's a new job that our students will have. We do not have enough outlets in every classroom for every student to be charging their device all day long. So I've spoken with IT and they have confidence that the devices, when fully charged, should last 8 hours, so that we should be good to go with that. In terms of who makes the final call, of course, ultimately it's my decision per the memorandum of agreement that we have with the teachers union, but I rarely, if never, make a decision in isolation. This is going to be a community decision if something needs to change that's different from the course that we're currently on. But as we speak today, the city of Melrose has been doing a fantastic job keeping our positive COVID cases low. Although, yes, we are in the yellow, that's not the only indicator that's going to determine what phase of learning we are in or what learning model most students are experiencing. So I looked at our numbers on Wednesday. As you know, they're updated every Wednesday by 6 p.m. And although we are, I think, one case higher than we were in the last report, remember, this is over a 14-day span. So we're always kind of looking at 2 weeks of data when we look at that color coding system. But our percent positivity rate is still less than 1%. We're at 0.65%. So that's good news for us. And our average daily incidence per 100,000 here in Melrose is just 4.7. So on the large scale, things are staying pretty stable here in Melrose. And that's largely in part to our community. All of you are doing a great job of wearing your masks, washing your hands, maintaining that physical distance, and staying home when you're sick. And that's the most essential thing that we can all do in order to ensure that our students are coming back in person, those who are ready and have selected that, and then staying in person. So keep up the good work on that end. In terms of any changes, so one of the things that we did in developing our plan, and something that was really important to me, was making sure that we had a common schedule. So no matter what learning model your child is in, whether it's in person, hybrid, or remote only, the schedule looks relatively the same, and that was intentional. I mentioned before about those relationships, routines, and resilience, and having a common schedule is really essential to establishing really good routines. And this is going to be an asset to us if and when we have to flow in and out of these different learning models as we enter the next phase of our plan. So for example, I would use the example of going from the full best fit model on October 19th, where we have some students who are all in person every day, 5 days a week, every week, some students who are in that hybrid cohort rotation, and some students who are learning from home. If there became a situation where we had a spike or we had an outbreak, really, and I needed to either make an adjustment for a class or a school or a grade level or the whole district, it would be a lot like me just giving you a call in the morning as I would for a snow day. And we should be able to very smoothly transition from that in-person model to remote only. And this phased in approach, where we've been remote for the last 4 weeks, is really essential to helping us be able to do that. So that could be an overnight switch. More challenging is when we're in a remote only model and getting ready to come back in person. That takes a little bit more planning, and we're going to want to give students and families a heads up, much like we're doing tonight, to say we're ready, plan on October 19th, start reestablishing those routines, and get prepared for what coming back to school is going to be like for your learner. So before we move on to the next question, I'll just add one more thing about coming back to school and those routines. Another thing that we're asking all of our students to have every day, so school supplies look different. It's the charged laptop every morning. It's a water bottle that they can refill. We have bottle filling stations. We are not using bubblers for obvious health reasons, but we do have places for students to refill their water bottles. And we want to make sure that they're staying hydrated because they will be wearing a mask for the majority of the day, with the exception of meals and mask breaks. Also, we're asking that students wear their mask every day. And I was just looking for mine. I don't know where I stuck it, but we're asking for students to make sure they're wearing a properly fitting mask every day. That properly fitting means it's snug over your nose and under your chin, and to have a backup mask in your backpack that's either like in a Ziploc bag or a brown paper bag so it can stay clean. That way, if something happens with your mask, if you have a big sneeze, if it gets soiled in any way or breaks, you have another mask that you know fits you really well on hand.
Very good. Thank you for that comprehensive response, Dr. Kuchenberger. Much appreciated. And you'll be presenting on all of this again in as much detail, if not more, at the upcoming school committee meeting on October 13th.
Yep, I'm going to continue to provide updates on the implementation of our plan throughout the school year.
Very good. Thank you very much. Let's move on. Same issues from a different angle, if you will. A parent asks, how can we justify moving ahead with the reopening when the numbers, cases, hospitalizations, deaths, and infection rate in the region are all higher than when school was originally scheduled to reopen last month? What's your take on that?
So my take on that is that we really need to think about our local context. And so every decision that we're making is evidence-based. We're looking at a variety of data sources and working really closely with our local Department of Health. I speak with our Director of Health, Ruth Clay, daily, sometimes multiple times a day. She thought she was on vacation this week, but I called her this morning and we had a long conversation. And so that, I think, should give the community confidence that, you know, we're not making these decisions in a vacuum. We're really looking at all the factors. And even if the numbers, let's say hypothetically in Melrose did start to increase in terms of positivity rates, we would still be asking a lot of questions about that. It's not just the color coding system that's going to determine what learning model students are experiencing. You know, questions we'll ask is like, well, what's causing the uptick in numbers? Is it a cluster? Is it related to the schools? Was there a certain event, a backyard barbecue, where, you know, several people became COVID positive? And then how does that impact the school setting? So there's a lot of factors that go into it. And although the numbers are rising around us, we do have more control here in our own city than we might have thought even 3 or 4 months ago. We know that wearing the masks, washing our hands frequently, maintaining that physical distance, and staying home when you're experiencing symptoms or know that you've been exposed to someone who is COVID positive have really helped control the numbers here in Melrose.
Very good, thank you. Continuing on the theme of metrics and reopening in phases, if we can. Many parents have questions about the triggers, if you will, to then move up and down a level from hybrid to fully in person, for example. And here are some of those questions that, again, perhaps you could respond either individually or collectively.
Sure.
Is the district fully prepared for in-person instruction? At what point will we possibly go back to all students being back to fully in-school learning? Do you think we will get to that point? We know it is hard to know for sure. And has there been any thought of speeding up the full in-person for kindergarten and first grade to be every week instead of the hybrid model? With one parent stating asynchronous hybrid is extremely hard for kids that don't know the first thing about reading, writing, and math. Your take on that, Doctor?
Sure. So I'll start. The first question, I think, was, are we prepared for fully in-person instruction? We're prepared for in-person instruction. We have all of the safety supplies that we need in order to ensure that our staff are able to mitigate as much risk and that our students are able to mitigate as much risk as possible. And notice that I keep talking about risk mitigation. That's intentional. You know, I've come to kind of do away with using the word safe, if you will, because what I'm learning is that everyone has a different definition of safe. And I'm never going to promise you anything that I know we can't deliver on. And so I can't promise that no one will ever be positive in the Melrose Public Schools. But what I can promise you is that we're doing everything within our control to mitigate the risks. So that includes maintaining, actually exceeding the state guidelines around physical distance. So we are requiring 6 feet of physical distance, seat to seat at all times. We've prepared our classrooms and instructional spaces with visual cues like floor decals and signage to help students and staff begin to understand what that looks like as they move about and through the school day. We've also outfitted every single classroom with like a COVID cleaning and care kit. And inside those COVID cleaning and care kits, classroom teachers have been given a box of gloves that they can use for when they're cleaning or disinfecting surfaces if they would like. They've also been given masks, adult masks, that in case they need to replace the mask they're wearing or a student needs to. They have child-size masks for the younger grades. We also have, every classroom will be given 1 microfiber cloth per day that will be switched out by their custodian and cleaned for them weekly, so that every day they'll have that for cleaning in their classroom if they so choose. They've been given a bucket of disinfected wipes. These wipes are for the adults to use only. They're not for the children to use, but they're to sanitize and disinfect high-touch surfaces like doorknobs and things like that. The classroom teachers have also prepared materials for students, so no students will be sharing materials. Every student is given their own materials to use throughout the day or week, depending on the program and the design of the lessons that the teacher has prepared. Every classroom's also been given 2 boxes of tissues, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but in the past, parents, we've relied on you to provide those types of things. And we want to, make sure that we're doing our job to have everything we need in the classroom. We've also given every classroom in those kits a spray bottle where a soap and water solution will be put in the bottle every day, and the custodian is responsible for refilling that for the classroom teacher and students. We chose soap and water because after lots of research, it was the one thing that we knew is effective in combating the coronavirus and is also safe for children to be exposed to during the day. And they can use it as well. So after meals, or if their desk becomes soiled, they can use this solution to clean their desk and wipe it either with a paper towel or a microfiber cloth. I know I'm forgetting a few things that are in the kit because I'm working from my memory, but another thing we have found through our extended school year program, which was all in person, was that when students take their masks off by their ears, the ear holds, and they fold their mask, they need a place to safely store their masks so it can stay clean when they're having a mask break or enjoying a snack or a meal. And so we're using just brown paper bags for that. It's something that they can reuse, but if it becomes soiled, it's a low cost and easy thing to replace and recycle. So all of the classrooms have all of those things, plus a few additional things. We've purchased some additional HEPA air filters to have in our nursing clinics and our medical waiting rooms. Again, just an added layer of risk mitigation that we thought, given that we have some access to some grant funding through the reopening coronavirus relief funds, that was a smart investment that will not only help in these COVID times, but also beyond. So students who have high allergies and things like that, those machines can be helpful for that, and staff. So I think the next question, if I'm remembering, Chairman, was at what point will we possibly be able to go fully back in school learning for all students? And so if you've had a chance to look at our comprehensive return to instruction plan, you know that we went through a multi-week feasibility study where principals worked with our DPW staff to go in and actually measure all of our instructional spaces and determine what's the feasibility if students are 6 feet apart, seat to seat, versus 3 feet apart, seat to seat, and what's the maximum capacity of each learning space. And that was really an important part in the early planning of our return to instruction model, because we had to know what was possible. And that helped inform our decisions. So what we learned was that even with the minimum physical distance of 3 feet, we still can't fit all of our students in all of our instructional spaces in every building. Some spaces are really large and we could put more than a class 3 feet. In other spaces, we would still have, a couple of students here and there that wouldn't be able to adequately fit inside in the classrooms or the building. And so our ultimate finding was that we would need about 15 to 20% of our staff, or of our students rather, to choose a full-time remote only learning option in order for us to get everyone in the building at 3 feet of physical distance. And so that's no guarantee because we're a public school system. And although some families, about 20%, have chosen the MDLA for their child right now, we also know that they're going to have an opportunity to revisit that at the end of the first trimester for students in grades 1 through 8, and at the end of the semester for grades in K through 12. So that's one of those things where it's, my best and worst answer these days is it depends. It depends on what everybody needs at that point in time when we think that we're ready to support that level of reentry. So that also goes for our K and 1 students. It was really my hope that the numbers would work out in a way where we'd be able to get all of the kindergartners in, all of the first graders in every day, every week, much like we are with our Group C students. But again, because of spacing and staffing, that just is not something that was feasible at this time. And the other part to think about is it's not just the physical space, but it's then, who supports that student. And we tested out a lot of different ideas of hiring more, more paraprofessionals, and could a teacher go back and forth between 2 classrooms with physical distance. And we, analyzed the pros and cons of that, along with many other inside and outside of the box ideas. So, can we speed it up? The answer to that is no. I don't think that would be wise of us. I think first we need to really have some patience in the process, which I remind myself daily, and remember that going slow to go far is really what's going to ensure that students are able to be learning in person for more, or hopefully the entire school year.
Very good. Thank you for that. Let's move to topic 2, special education and IEPs. We've had several questions submitted concerning IEPs and services students receive via their IEPs, with one parent asking, why are IEPs not being followed remotely? And another related question, why wasn't there written notice that the IEPs would be changed prior to the start of school?
Sure, those are really important questions. So when most students' IEPs were written, we were in a completely different context. We had a different type of schedule, a different type of learning model, and a different approach to service delivery than what we currently do at this moment. So one of our risk mitigating factors has been to minimize the amount of movement and to minimize the density of student clusters or classrooms, right? And so in order for us to do that, we had to reinvent the secondary schedule completely. So the high school and the middle school schedule in the past had a 7-day rotation. So of course we're only in school 5 days, and that created some very complicated double waterfall. And IEPs were written in the context of that 7-day rotation. And so, for example, a student might have in their service grid that they're going to receive reading support or math support 3 times 45 in a 7-day cycle. And so that means that they would have that small group or individualized support and service on that schedule. Well, now we have a 5-day rotation. We're Monday through Friday because we have that cohort rotation, which I'll talk a little bit more about the why behind that as well in a moment. And classes, rather than them having 6 or 7 classes in a day at the secondary level, students are only transitioning 3 times. And the why behind that was to minimize the amount of density in the hallways. So, imagine, 800 students traveling through the high school or middle school at any one time. The hallways get really clustered. It's kind of like salmon swimming upstream for a visual. And so we want to avoid that because we need to maintain that physical distance. So at the middle school, and the high school, they're having 3 periods a day as opposed to 6 or 7, and they're 90 minutes long. At the middle school, the students aren't traveling to classes like they would on their grade level team. Rather, the teachers are coming to them. And then at the high school, the students do transition, but it's only 3 times a day rather than twice as many in our pre-COVID schedule. So with that being said, that's why the IEP is not being implemented exactly like it was, because it was written for a different schedule and a different time with a different context. The other thing that's happening is to avoid students transitioning to multiple rooms and or support staff pushing into multiple rooms. A lot of services are being delivered remotely, even if your child's learning in person. And again, that is to minimize the amount of close contacts that we have. So if and when, frankly, there is a COVID positive student or staff member, it doesn't put everybody out on quarantine, and instead we can contact trace and sort of isolate the case as much as possible. So why weren't people given written notice ahead of time? Partly we were developing this plan right up through the summer. And so we had to really kind of build the plane while flying it, so to speak. But we did include information in our comprehensive return to instruction plan. And if you were to look into that plan under the special education section, you would see where we talk about a regular and consistent schedule of classes, that services and therapies as required by a student's IEP would be offered synchronously and asynchronously. We did talk about the structured learning time so that the student can access the state standards and the way that that would influence the implementation of the IEP. And also, the frequent interactions between teachers and families is something that we want to maintain. And so all parents of students with IEPs should be in communication with their school liaisons, and they should have received a COVID-19 special education learning plan. And so again, it's a plan for a plan, which seems redundant and silly, but this is to ensure that any adaptation that needs to occur is agreed upon and also allows the student to still make progress toward their IEP goals.
Very good. Thank you for that, Superintendent. Topic 3, health and safety. We've had a series of questions regarding health and safety, not surprisingly, testing, COVID positive cases, and the like. Mary Blyler, who is a grandmother here in Melrose and a remote school helper in the district, thank you, Ms. Blyler, asks, quote, if it happens, how many positive COVID test results among staff and students will it take to close schools again? Is testing mandatory for teachers and staff? Is it available?
So great questions, Mary. First, is testing mandatory? So no teachers or staff were required to have COVID testing. However, we did offer a clinic here in Melrose prior to the start of the school year for teachers to choose to, or staff members, really any employee of the district could have chosen to have a COVID test if they felt that they were having symptoms or that was something they wanted to do. We then also partnered with our neighbors in Wakefield to offer a second round of testing a week or so later so that anyone who, again, wanted to be tested could be tested for free. So it wasn't required, but it was made available for folks. When we're thinking about how many positive COVID test results will it take to close school again, I'm going to remind you of what I was saying earlier about it depends, right? It depends where the COVID positive staff member or student is working or learning from. For example, if a staff member is an MDLA teacher and they're working remotely from home and they're not coming into the school building, we might have a positive staff member, but it doesn't pose a public health threat because that person's not in the school community, not coming in the building. And that would be true for a student who is learning remotely as well. The rationale behind our 5-week in, 5-week out was really to help mitigate the risk of having positive COVID cases in the schools. So although not the most convenient schedule for working families, I'm sure, we have 2 big reasons why we chose that 5-week rotation. Number one, given what we know about brain development and about the importance of relationships, routines, and students' ability to cultivate resilience, we felt that having 5 consecutive days in person with your teachers would allow students to maintain or gain maximum flow and then maintain that flow in order to prepare them for more success when they were learning from home in the asynchronous weeks. The second reason was that when students are coming into the building in the hybrid model, they'll have 5 days in person. Families are asked daily to do a wellness check of your child and ensure that you're not sending them to school if they're ever exhibiting any of the common COVID symptoms. And then with the 2 weekends and the 5 days learning from home, we have 9 days where a family can notice if their child is developing any COVID-related symptoms before that child enters back into the school community. So that's another risk mitigator that we put in place intentionally to try to avoid having a surge of COVID cases in the schools. In terms of when will we shut the schools down or go completely remote, again, that's going to depend. Our hope is that if we're following our protocols and we're following our physical distancing and wearing masks and washing our hands, that when there is a positive COVID case, that it'll be isolated. We'll be able to keep it isolated either to a classroom or just even hopefully a person, because again, if they're not considered a close contact, then there's no need for folks to quarantine. We also believe that this opportunity we've had to start remote for most will help us ensure that if and when there is a teacher who needs to quarantine or a student that needs to quarantine, the learning can continue. And so I'll give an example of a situation, a hypothetical situation of a hybrid teacher testing positive. So, God forbid that happens, and one of our teachers who's teaching in the hybrid model tests positive. That teacher will certainly need to isolate. And so these are two really important terms for us to get clear about as a community. You quarantine for 14 days when you're a close contact. That means that you came in contact with someone who is COVID positive without a mask within 6 feet for 15 cumulative minutes. So if you become a close contact, you're going to be required or ordered by the Department of Health, not the school district, to quarantine for 14 days. If during that quarantine you then test positive, the Department of Health will then order you to isolate for 10 consecutive days until you are symptom-free, right? So 10 days minimum, and then until you're symptom-free for 72 hours. In this situation, if a teacher had to quarantine or had to isolate, depending on the teacher's health, if they're asymptomatic or if they're feeling like they're able to, they could continue to remote into the classroom and continue to teach their students, and we would provide coverage in the classroom. And so we have a couple of ways to provide coverage, which I'm happy to speak about in a moment. So the same would be true for a student. If a student becomes a close contact and needs to quarantine, then they can continue their learning from home. And that's where communication is going to be so important with the family, talking to the teacher, so that together you can develop a plan, a continuing education plan for your child. But if they're asymptomatic, or if they're feeling well enough to access their learning, they still will be able to do that. And then if they need to isolate because they become COVID positive, the same would be true so long as they're feeling up to it. Of course, with the focus being on recovery from the virus as the top priority. So I don't know if I answered all the parts of that question.
You answered that question and a few succeeding questions as well. Well done and much appreciated. You did mention coverage, though. Did you want to talk more about that?
Sure. So one of the things that we've been thinking really strategically about throughout the planning process was, what happens when a teacher needs to be out? Typically, we would have a roster of daily subs that, different members of our team here in the Melrose Public Schools would call them each morning when they know that there's going to be an absence or an extended absence to coordinate coverage. We knew that daily subs was going to be a higher risk than what we were willing to take. So we've utilized some of our reopening schools coronavirus relief funds to create this new position, which you've seen advertised on our website and in the local papers, called the Daily Student Support. And so this is guaranteed employment for subs, so they're not waiting for that phone call each morning. But we've brought folks in who were interested. They went through a training with me that included going through all of our COVID health and safety protocols. And then I also walked them through our comprehensive return to instruction plan, so they knew exactly what they were signing up for. We talked about the nuances between elementary, middle, and high school, because it does look really different at each of those phase levels. And then if that sounded really fun for them and they were willing to commit, we talked about what would be their preference in terms of the age of students they wanted to work with and what schools they had a preference for. Again, much like we did with our students and our teachers, we're trying to accommodate everyone as best we can because we want folks to stay committed to us. I also asked them not to date other districts. So typically when we have a daily sub, they could be subbing in multiple districts. And for us in Melrose, that was often the case because we had a lower rate of pay than some of our neighboring communities. So through these grant funds, we were able to increase the pay to be more competitive. So it is $100 a day. It's 1 hour shorter because, as you know, the students are leaving early to do that asynchronous work at home so teachers can prep and plan. And we've asked them to commit to a minimum of 2 to 3 days per week. And so right now we've had some good success. We're still recruiting. So if you know anyone, send them my way. We've had 3 sets of training. And right now we have at least one person every day at each of our schools. And we're starting to put a second person at each of the schools. Our goal is to have 2 or 3 daily student supports so that if a teacher needs to be out, there's someone who's already a part of that school community, who knows the protocols and routines, who's trusted and reliable, that can cover. They might also provide relief for our teachers. So in the elementary grades, the teachers are with the kids all day from 8 o'clock until the students go home at 1:20, start dismissal at 1. And so if they need a bathroom break, if they need to call a parent, if they just need to take a mask break, this person can provide that coverage while also maintaining physical distance, wearing a mask, and following all the protocols, hand hygiene. They also can provide recess coverage or coverage for a teacher if and when they need to attend an IEP meeting, an individualized education plan meeting for a student. Really, in essence, they are like a utility player for our students. So whatever the principal designates as the most urgent student need on any given day is what these folks have agreed to step in and do. And so we're super excited about that. We've been really flexible with folks. We have some parents who have said, this sounds like a good fit for me. I'm not able to maybe access my employment because of all things COVID related, but I am available on rotation with my kids. So if your children are in cohort 1, they're in person. Some parents have said, I'd like to then be available to do 5 days of daily student support during that week my students are learning in person. And so we're happy to work with anyone who's willing to commit and is interested. And we've found some really great folks. So we're really excited about the success of that program.
Terrific. Great question and great answer. Thank you for that, Superintendent. Moving on, next topic, live streaming and related concerns about equity in the models. Carrie Roach, a high school parent, has asked some questions about live streaming, classes and cameras, and others have asked too. Ms. Roach asked, why did the district not invest in cameras so that Melrose High School classes, especially the core classes, English, science, and math, could be live streamed to the high school students that are not in class that week? And I should say, Superintendent, that this question about the live streaming of in-person classes to students who are working from home is a recurring question. We're seeing it come in multiple times during this live stream. So if you could speak a bit to your take on that, that would be appreciated.
Sure. So this is a popular question, and it's something that we've talked a lot about and have thought a lot about. One of the things that is always a part of my decision making is, in a moment where we're asking people to do everything they've done differently in their work, we're often asking ourselves what needs to be mandated and what needs to be nurtured. And one example I would give is, where teachers work from or where staff members work from. Some districts required that their car was in the parking lot and they walked through the threshold of the building on day one. And that was the choice that they made. That would be a mandate, right? We chose to nurture that. We chose to encourage staff to make sure that their spaces were ready for them if they were ready to come into the building and begin working and learning from their space during those 10 days of professional development. And the majority of our teachers are. Those who can are. Those who and those who aren't because they have there's a variety of factors that are driving that. I feel very similarly about live stream. I know that there's some districts who just said they're doing it. We wanted to make sure that we're supporting teachers with all of the learning and growing that they're doing, and making sure that we're delivering a high quality teaching and learning experience for each and every student at a pace at which we can support. And so part of it is technology infrastructure, really making sure we have the right supports in order for everyone to be live streaming at the exact same time. and also supporting students who are learning in person. So there's a bunch of different dynamics that go on there. We did invest heavily in our technology. Our IT department has been working around the clock all summer long to ensure that all of our teachers have brand new laptops. This is not something that they had before. They had desktops. So even right now, I'm live streaming from my laptop, but it's hardwired to a docking station in my office in order to ensure that I have that stable internet connection to make it through this presentation. I'm also not moving around. I'm trying not to move around. Sitting here in my office, this is not the way teaching happens. Teachers move about the room. They're interacting with students in a variety of ways and using a variety of materials. Some that pick up nicely on the laptop and others that don't. So that was one of the kind of factors. We also invested in student devices, prioritizing connectivity and making sure that each student will have access to the classroom, because this is how they're accessing their classroom in remote only. And we needed to be prepared for that if that became a situation that every student needed to be engaged in. And so I'm not giving up on live streaming. I know that there's teachers that are already wondering about it and thinking about it. We're working with IT to talk about what tools would be necessary to enhance a live streaming experience and make it more manageable for students. So for example, some of our teachers have document cameras in their classrooms. And what that is, if you're unfamiliar, is a tool that hooks up to your computer, and then any document or item, you could put, this mug underneath it, and it projects it onto the screen or through the laptop. And so that's something that we think could enhance the instruction and make for a better live streaming situation. The other challenge we have is audio amplification. And so some of our classrooms have decent acoustics, others not so great. And so we know that if we're going to move to a live streaming model, we need a way to ensure that the students on the other side of the screen at home are able to have a high quality experience, because we've all been on that WebEx or that GoToMeeting or name your platform that is not awesome or great. And it's really hard to sustain your attention over time when you don't have all of the right technological tools. So I'm hopeful that teachers, when they're ready, will want to explore this, and that the IT department will be able to support them with these tools that will enhance that experience. So when we do get to offering live streaming to students through a pilot type of model, that it'll be really high quality and students will be able to stay engaged. The only other thing I would add to that is one of the first things I purchased when I came to the district was a 360 OWL camera. Again, thinking about how could we make live streaming work even as soon as July 1st when I started. And we've been using that as a leadership team for some of our meetings where staff members need to be in more than one location, and some people are in person. And the feedback that we've learned from using that tool is that when it's a small space or if everyone's staying in one position, that tends to work really well. But when multiple people are talking with masks on, that's the other thing we have to think about. It became harder for them to hear and follow the conversation. And so it takes a different skill set and training also to be able to manage what's happening in the room in person while also managing what's happening in this virtual room. And so I'm optimistic. I think that when teachers are ready, they'll begin to dabble and explore with that, but we don't want to push that and mandate that. We'd rather nurture that.
Very good. Thank you for that. Another parent question, this one from Emily Nault, asks about equity in the different models. Quote, can you please clarify how we will ensure the same equity in instruction and curriculum between remote learners and the hybrid learners? Along the same lines, please clarify how the remote learners will not be ahead and get more teacher time.
Sure. This is a question that comes up a lot as well. And so I would start by just reminding us all that, equity is not equality. And so the analogy I always like to use is that Equality is everybody gets a pair of shoes. Equity is everybody gets a pair of shoes that fits. And so when we think about equity between the models, we're thinking about what does each individual learner need, and how do we best meet that learner's needs. The questions we're asking ourselves every day is, what does Julie know? What is she ready to learn? And through our focus on personalized learning, we believe that we're going to be able to meet every learner where they are and ensure that they're making growth and progress in a way that allows them to accelerate their learning. We're really trying to reframe this and not think about students as being behind or them having gaps, because everyone has been through this experience, and everyone has experienced this in a really different way. And so our focus has been on ensuring that all of our teachers have had training and opportunities to think about trauma-informed practices, and also inclusive practices that will work both in the remote environment and in the hybrid environment, in the in-person environment. There's pros and cons to each model. There's challenges and benefits to each model. And that's why our plan is about the best fit. We wanted to make sure that families were able to make a decision based on their individual students, not even their whole family. We have some families who one child's, the best fit was the MDLA, and the other child's, the best fit was the hybrid. And so to me, that is equity. That is everyone getting what they need. It doesn't mean everyone gets the same thing. And the benefits of that those students who are coming in the hybrid model for that in-person week will never be replicated in the MDLA model. And we know that, but we also know that the gives to get balance out dependent upon each individual student. One of the things we're committed to, and this is why having that common planning time each and every day, although inconvenient for families, because we're releasing students earlier, an hour early, and we're asking them to do an hour of asynchronous work. But part of that was to ensure that we have equity at the forefront of all of our planning and instructional delivery. So that enables every staff member across the city to be available at the exact same time, so that whether you're a remote-only teacher, a hybrid teacher, or an in-person teacher, you're able to collaborate with your colleagues and lesson plan together. And we're really encouraging our grade level and content teams to co-plan, to work smarter, not harder. And you'll find that in some of the grade levels, there might be one teacher who's delivering the science instruction or developing the science lesson for their colleagues to deliver across the city. That's how we ensure that we have a guaranteed and viable curriculum for all learners, no matter what model is the best fit for them.
Terrific. Another great question and a great answer. Thank you, Doctor. A question regarding the Melrose Distance Learning Academy from Jillian LaRosa, a parent who asks, quote, why is the MDLA kindergarten day as long as it is? And can you share any research or studies or thinking that was used to help make this decision? What was it specifically that drove the Melrose Public Schools to take the approach that we are taking?
Sure. So our why behind the schedule was really to make sure that we had that consistent routine, so that no matter what model students are in, they have access to the same curriculum, they have access to the same materials, and the same opportunities, although they might look different or be delivered differently. We don't think or believe that kindergartners or any learner or adult, frankly, should be on a screen for 5 hours a day. And that's not our intent in the MDLA. And I think what I'm learning and seeing from our teachers is that although students are logged in all day, the expectation is not that they're looking at the screen all day long. There's different times throughout the day, depending upon the teacher and the class and the work that they're doing, where the teacher might invite the students to remain logged in, but turn off your camera and mute yourself while you independently work with these materials or work on this task or project. So the intent was for students to be connected to their teachers for 5 hours a day, not necessarily be absorbing screen time for that many hours in a day.
Very good, thank you. A question on racial equity. Are we teaching any of these or similar theories: critical race theory, anti-racism, white fragility, to teachers, staff, and or to students?
Sure. So throughout the summer, actually prior to me officially starting, I participated in weekly community circles there was about 30 of our staff members who on Sunday evenings, this was immediately following George Floyd's murder, that Sunday night, so that happened on a Thursday, Sunday night, I logged in at 8 p.m. to a community circle that was facilitated by our SEL, social emotional learning specialist. And there were about 35 teachers having a conversation about race. And I was so amazed and pleasantly surprised at that level of response and commitment. And to think, on a Sunday night that many folks were engaging in this really difficult but necessary conversation. And those conversations continued weekly throughout the spring, through the end of the school year. While that was happening, many of our coaches, under the leadership of our Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning, Dr. Margaret Adams, were also had already created prior to that happening, a series of professional development opportunities that were offered to staff throughout the summer. Some of those included book clubs. So I know that some staff members read the book, So You Want to Talk About Race. Others read White Fragility. There was a whole variety of topics. I'm not even going to be able to remember all of them. That staff volunteered to participate in these book clubs and then have conversations and develop instructional materials based on what they were learning from these conversations. Additionally, there was a documentary series that was created for staff around a variety of social justice issues, where folks would watch the documentary prior to and then have different discussions and create community circles or conversations that they could then take back into the classroom with them in an age-appropriate way. So that was going on well before I came to Melrose, and continued all throughout the summer. And then in September, all of our staff participated in a full day of training on interrupting racism and bias. The training is going to continue throughout our professional development days. So next week is October 13th already, and we have an additional 2 hours of required training, and that will happen on each of the 3 professional development days that we have. And staff continue to have conversations, and we continue to put resources out to families as well, because we know that schools do not create racism and do not create the racial justice issues that we're experiencing in our country. We certainly play an important role in helping solve them, but it takes the whole community to really do that. And so we know that we need parents to partner with us and be doing this work at home as a family at the same time that we're doing this work with staff and students inside the schools. So Dr. Adams put out this beautiful tool that had a variety of age-appropriate resources. If you haven't seen it, send me an email and I'm happy to share with you. But it had questions that you could use as a family to talk about some of these different topics, and read alouds or videos that you could also access. And so in that way, we're trying to support the whole child and the family as we all work to be anti-racist together. We're also working to integrate and revise our curricula. So I'll speak specifically to social studies. That department has been working with the new history and social studies curriculum frameworks that came out from the Department of Massachusetts Elementary and Secondary Education, and they're also revising and creating materials that align to the teaching tolerance standards for social justice. And so we're asking students to connect their own individual identity to topics, to reflect on the diversity in our community here in Melrose and beyond, and talk about some of the identity issues of social justice while taking on civic action projects. An example would be the work that we're doing around Indigenous Peoples Day that's coming up on Monday. Teachers have been given resources and guides to help them frame these conversations with their students in a way that's culturally proficient, and also links to resources and materials, and including extensions that can be taken home and supported with families to continue that conversation. And so there's so much work that's going on in the Melrose Public Schools. It's actually really remarkable and very impressive. It's one of the things that caught my eye from day one, and I continue to be impressed and proud of the work that not only our teachers are doing, but our principals and our students as well.
Very good. Thank you for that, Superintendent. Superintendent, I see we've reached the 1 hour mark. Can I prevail upon you to stay with us just a bit longer for some more questions? Thank you for that. To the more mundane for the moment, but nonetheless important, lunch and other logistics. We've had several questions about how lunch is going to work. And it may be important, if you can, Superintendent, to address these at the different levels. For example, Lori Hazeltine, a parent, asks, quote, "Could you please explain how lunch is going to work in the hybrid system?" And furthermore, Kelly Rosnoff, a parent, echoes that with another question. In an important question, since there is a significantly higher risk of infection when indoors without a mask on, do you think it is safe for the kids to eat lunch inside school? And what additional protocols are in place for ensuring that this is safe?
Sure. Those are important questions. The first thing I would want everyone to know is that lunch is free for everybody this year. I've been working closely with Ken Dolce, our nutrition director, to think about what would be meal ideas that students would want to enjoy each day. And he is ready to serve every single student in the Melrose Public Schools if they so choose. And he's also been packaging them in a way that there's a breakfast and a lunch in the meal, and I'll talk a little bit about how students get the meals. And he's even working toward creating hot meals that can be sort of picked up, grab and go for those who are learning remotely and heated up at home. So the first thing I would want you to know that no matter what learning model your child has chosen, whether you're in person, hybrid, learning from home in the hybrid, or learning in person, or your MDLA, you have access to school meals. And Lincoln and the high school are our two pickup locations for those meals. And it's no questions asked, you just come and get your meals for your student. So the other thing to think about is that the way that we've organized the school day at each phase level is driving how lunch is served. So at the elementary level, the students are mostly staying in their classrooms all day long with their teachers. Art and music and digital literacy and PE are coming into the student remotely, either through a device or through the whiteboard that's in the classroom in the hybrid model, even when they're in person. And similarly, lunch is being delivered to the classroom. So our nutrition department has created has purchased hot and cold carrying bags, so they are able to bring the meals right to the classroom or to a location in the school where then a paraprofessional or an adult might go and get the meals for any student who wants a school meal. And students are eating meals in the classroom, preferably outside, weather dependent. And so I know that when I was at Horace Mann last week, there was a teacher who was taking advantage of the nice weather and had planned to be outside all day with her kindergarten learners, and they were having their lunch outside as well. So that's always an option for teachers. I would say to families, we want to be outside as much as we can. So making sure your child is dressed properly is going to be an important factor to your teacher being able to take advantage of that as an option. When we can't be outside, students are 6 feet apart in their classrooms always. We're also opening the windows during lunchtime so that when students have their mask off and they're eating their meals, there's air circulating in the classroom. At the middle school level, students will eat in the cafeteria. That will be one of the few times that the students are leaving their classrooms at the middle school. The other time is for physical education. And so in the middle school, we've taken additional desks or extra desks, because remember, we have half the amount of desks in the classrooms, and created dining stations for each student that are all facing in one direction and that are 6 feet apart or more, so that students can enjoy their meals in that space. And again, when possible, enjoying meals outside. And so we do have some picnic tables that have been provided out front through DPW to just expand the CAF space in that way as well. At the high school, students will have a little more flexibility. You're noticing that there's sort of more restriction, and then as the students are older and more independent, we're allowing them a little bit more freedom, if you will, in terms of how they're moving about the building. So high school students will be transitioning to 3 classes each day, washing hands before and after transitions, of course, with either soap and water or hand sanitizer. And then they will have lunch in the cafeteria. So they're 15-foot tables. There will be 2 students, one on either end, facing the same direction if they choose to eat in the CAF. And then also using the outdoor space. I know that Principal Merrill at the high school was thinking about the courtyard between the high school and middle school as being a place where students could choose to come and dine. For our students who are already in person, I see them outside in many locations out in the area of the parking lot towards where the Christmas trees sale usually is. Students are out there often, or in the overhang area, there's some picnic tables, and I've seen students and staff eating lunch out there. So we're getting creative. We're trying to be outside as much as we can. But again, remember, it's risk mitigation. So we have lots of layers. There's no one thing we're doing to mitigate the risk. But obviously students need to have meals.
Very good. And you may have mentioned this, Superintendent, but even if you did, it probably bears repeating. My understanding is that lunches brought from home to elementary schools must be nut-free. Am I right about that?
I actually am not. I don't know if that's for every classroom across the city or if it's specific classrooms. There certainly are some classrooms that are designated as allergy or nut-free classrooms. Very
good. Start and dismissal times of schools have been listed as staggered times with an approximate 30-minute window. For those of us that have children in multiple schools, is there an actual time that children need to be in the building, as well as for dismissal? Generally, or more generally speaking, how does the start and dismissal work with the hybrid model?
So it depends on the school. All of the schools across the city from pre-K through 12 have a staggered start and a staggered dismissal. And so principals, I believe, have sent out communications, or probably will be resending them out as we prepare for more students to start coming in. But there's certain, like at Franklin, for example, I observed the drop-off where there's families were given a certain color, and then they're given a window of time, like a 10-minute window. That's their time to pull in if they're driving their student and drop their student off, and there's signage. It's pretty fascinating to see how well it works. It's highly efficient. Parents aren't getting out of the car and they're dropping their students off. So each school, depending on the queuing system that they're able to create and the campus that they're on, are going to have a different sort of drop off and pickup plan. But the idea is, again, we're de-densifying. So we don't want all of the families coming at once and standing around in clusters. We want everyone to maintain physical distance and be wearing masks. But we're able to, between 8 and 8:30, get all of the elementary students in, we believe. We've tested it, obviously, with K and 1. And at Franklin, they have the most students right now, and they've had some good success with their, or great success with their drop-off. So we're learning a lot from them, given that they have the most students right now. Same thing at the end of the day, it's a staggered dismissal. So your principal will tell you what your dismissal time is, and then you'll make sure you're either there if you're walking or bike riding at that time to receive your student, or in the queue if you're driving.
Very good, thank you. Secondary school scheduling, if you will. 4 different parents have submitted essentially the same question about the 90-minute blocks at the secondary level, especially with regard to the middle school. Quote, what is the reason for these longer 90-minute sessions 2 times a week at the middle school level? Are there any plans to revisit this model for students who are struggling with that type of schedule?
Sure. So pre-COVID, I believe the blocks at the middle school and high school were 54, 55 minutes. I don't remember the exact number. And when we started looking at how can we mitigate risk, one of the factors that we felt was important was minimizing the number of transitions. We talked about, the feasibility of high school students being in the same room every day. What would that look like? Is that possible? As you know, that's possible at the elementary level because all of the kids access the same courses by the same teacher all at the same time. At the middle school, they have a team model, and so they share teachers across the team. Because there's more content expertise at that point. So, a science teacher might teach 3 classes in a day. And then at the high school level, it's really individual student based, right? The schedule's driven by what courses, what credits, what interests and electives students have. So that is really unique to the individual student. So minimizing the transitions, the only way for us to do that was to extend the block. And so that was one of the whys behind it, was to de-densify hallways, to minimize transitions. Another was to give students a chance to focus in on, those courses for that day rather than running through their whole schedule every day on a rotation and in a waterfall schedule. So that was something that we thought would be a benefit to the students. The intent, however, I want to be really clear, has never been that the teacher will teach for 90 minutes straight. That's never the case. Teachers aren't providing direct instruction. They weren't pre-COVID for a whole 55 or 56 minute block. There's always a level of, instruction, direct instruction in the form of like a mini lesson where the teacher's making connections, delivering the teaching point, allowing for some active engagement, and then linking them off before they go to do some independent or collaborative group work. And that will be the same in the hybrid model and in the remote only model. Again, there might be a time where the teacher's teaching a lesson and then asking students or inviting students to turn their camera off and work independently for some period of time. Keeping logged in during that time allows the teacher to call them back or allows the student to, ask questions of the teacher. But in a day, they have those 3 courses or 2 courses, depending on their schedule, that they're focusing on. So those are some of the whys behind the 90-minute block. The biggest is, risk mitigation and trying to minimize transitions when students are learning in person.
Very good, thank you. Is there a discrepancy in the amount of time and number of full weeks that cohort 1 gets as compared to cohort 2?
Yes, we have 170 school days this year. And so what we did was look at the calendar. We looked at the number of short weeks that they were, and we looked at when we were, officially starting school. So if we count the first 3 days as transition days, all students had the same access on those 3 days. And then you start to look at 1 week in, 1 week learning from home. And without us splitting a week and a day, because there's 3 days there, we would have to take like a short week and say, okay, cohort 1's going to be Monday, cohort 2 will be Tuesday, and we're going to split the next day, half and half. There was not going to be a perfect split. With that being said, we also know that depending on the age of the students in the phase level, middle school, high school, elementary, there might be opportunities throughout the year where principals and or teachers together want to use those days in different ways. So this is where we are today. This is the cohort rotation at this time. Yes, technically cohort 1 has 3 more days than cohort 2, if I'm adding up the math correctly. But the only way to balance that would be to split a week. And so we think that depending how the year goes, there will be other ways for us to sort of make up that time or adjust the schedule. Also, it'll depend if we stay in the hybrid rotation for the whole entire year. So this is our rotation for now, and we'll continue to look at it as we go. At the high school level, it's a whole different, and at the middle school level, it's a whole different factor because you have to think about the short weeks and the block rotation, right? So it's not as simple as just counting the calendar days. You have to look at how many times does block A meet in the entire calendar year? How many times does block B meet in the entire calendar year with the cohort rotation? So it's not as simple as just counting the days on the calendar. But if you're doing that, yes, your math is correct.
Very good, thank you. And a related and a recurring question. A parent asks, if we kept our child remote to begin the school year, will we have the option to revisit sending him, her, or them hybrid throughout the balance of the school year?
So yes, and it depends is the answer. It's all dependent upon staffing and spacing. So in our plan, we did ask families to make a commitment depending on the grade level of the student. So if they're in kindergarten or high school, their grading cycle is on a semester basis. So we asked families to choose a learning model for the first semester. At the end or near the end of the first semester, we'll ask families to reassess if this learning model is working for their child. In grades 1 through 8, their grading reporting cycle is on a trimester schedule. And so we've asked those students and families to experience the learning model that they selected for the first trimester. And then a few weeks leading up to the close of that trimester, we'll be asking families and students, does this learning model still work for you? Of course, if there's a situation that's emergent or your family situation has changed, or there's some sort of, crisis that needs to be addressed, talk to your child's teacher, talk to your building principal. They are the people who are going to best be able to help you either manage through the situation that you're in and or talk about the possibilities of making a change sooner than those benchmark dates. But again, it's all a puzzle. The work that the principals did to match up, and I should have said this in the beginning, our principals were able to meet 100% of the students' requests, learning model requests. And then what we did was we looked at staff preferences. Those who needed accommodations for qualifying medical conditions, of course, we tried to meet all of those because our aim was to minimize the number of staff needing to take a leave of absence. And then we looked at preferences. So we asked staff to make a first and a second choice in terms of learning model preference. And we were able to match up the majority of staff preferences so long as it met the student need. So there's some cases where staff were asked to teach in a model that might not have been their first preference, but that was driven by what our students needed. So it's a delicate puzzle that we've put together here, like hundreds, I'm not exaggerating, of hours of work to figure this out. And so it's not as easy as thinking about one individual because we have to think about the whole system. And that's why we're asking folks to hang tight to those benchmark dates. And then it'll depend on the numbers.
Very good, thank you. And at this point, we're well over the allotted 1 hour. If I may ask you one more question,
Sure.
Superintendent, and clearly we'll have to do this again, perhaps multiple times. But for now, what about some of the fun stuff in our schools a parent asks? For example, will there be school photos this year? Will there be fundraising events for the PTOs and book fairs and the like, to the best of your knowledge?
I would say yes, of course, as long as we can think about it through the lens of risk mitigation. So, can we have school photos in a way where we're able to maintain physical distance and still have that experience? We think that we can do that. We know that we can do that. We've done that with our seniors, and we've partnered with Life Touch to create a very low risk way for seniors to have that experience. A little different than how it happens in the school day, because we just have that many more students and we're not making appointments and they aren't happening in the evening. But we are committed to figuring out a way to make that happen. Probably not this fall, because again, our priority is on getting the kids in. So we're trying to, go slow to go far, but definitely in the spring, I can see us hosting a school photo option. Fundraisers, events, I would look at graduation and project graduation. There was ways for us to work strategically with smart people in our community to make those events happen for our kids. They were fun. The risk levels were mitigated to the best that we could. And those were two really positive, successful events. So I am like the internal optimist, and I think that if it's good for kids, we should never say no because of logistics. We can always figure that stuff out with some strategic thinking and thoughtful planning.
Very good. Dr. Hugenberger, thank you so much for taking the time
My
to
pleasure.
do this. And to Mayor Paul Broder, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for organizing this program. Again, Melanie Acevedo, thank you so much for providing the technical support for the program. My school committee colleague, Jen McAndrew, for her subject matter support, and certainly my school committee colleagues for their support of this program and this initiative. And importantly, to our viewers, thank you for being with us now and hopefully in the future for rebroadcast. And certainly and importantly to those community members who submitted questions to help make this program possible. All much appreciated. To all again, thank you very much. And Doctor, I suspect we'll be seeing you again soon in this format and otherwise.
You can't get rid of me that easy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.